At the elite Willow Creek Academy gala, a 5-year-old boy pointed across a silent auditorium and called the black housekeeper, Patricia, Mommy. His biological mother's champagne flute shattered. The 200 most powerful parents in the city stopped breathing, and the nanny knew her life and the child was over. Patricia was the full-time nanny for the Chen family, paid to be invisible. For little Leo, she was the one who soothed nightmares and packed lunches, his entire world. But in the eyes of the law and his furious billionaire father, she was just the help. This single word, mommy, would trigger a custody war, expose a fortune's worth of secrets, and ask one brutal question: what makes a real mother? Patricia took the nanny job out of pure bone-deep desperation. Her student loans were a hungry monster, and her mother's medical bills kept coming. The Chen estate in Pacific Heights wasn't a home. It was a fortress of marble and silence, where her uniform was chosen to blend into the wallpaper. Her employer, Alexander Chen, wasn't just wealthy. He was a tectonic plate in the tech world, a billionaire who acquired companies before most people heard their names. He hired Patricia through an elite agency with one non-negotiable directive: you are background radiation, you provide care, not connection. His wife Lillian was a gallery owner who existed in a perfume cloud of art openings and spa residencies. She'd chosen Leo's name, his wardrobe, the architect for the nursery, but after the difficult birth, she'd seemingly decided the messy business of motherhood was beneath her. Leo's first word was mama. It was Trisha, uttered while clutching Patricia's braid during a thunderstorm. For 3 years, Patricia's world shrank to the rhythms of a small boy. She was the one who kissed skinned knees, who explained why the moon followed the car, who lay beside him until his breathing deepened into sleep. Alexander wrote the checks, Lillian posted curated photos, but Patricia built the tiny, sacred universe of Leo's daily life. She loved him, a quiet, treasonous love she knew could get her fired. And the system was designed to keep her in her place. Her contract had a non-fraternization clause. Her live-in suite was beautiful but monitored, with a keypad log on her door. Her weekly meetings with Mrs. Chen were called alignment briefings, where Lillian would review Leo's schedule like a CEO evaluating a subsidiary. The first crack appeared when Leo was 4. At a private playground, another child asked where his mommy was. Leo, without looking up from his digger, pointed at Patricia and said, "She right there." Lillian, sipping an espresso 10 yards away, went very still. That night, Patricia's schedule was amended. More independent play time was mandated, less physical affection. The tension was a live wire after that, humming just beneath the polished surface. Patricia began finding parenting books left open on her desk, passages about detachment circled in red. Lillian started showing up unannounced to observation sessions, watching Patricia read to Leo with the cold focus of a lab technician. Then came the Willow Creek Academy Autumn Gala. The school wasn't just prestigious, it was a launchpad for dynasties. Admission was a multi-year campaign of donations and influence. For Alexander Chen, it was the next logical acquisition. Leo's performance there as a student and as an heir was critical. The invitation said parents and guardians. Patricia's instructions were clear. Wear the provided black dress, stand at the rear of the auditorium, do not engage, you are security detail for a priceless asset, not a guest. The hall was a cathedral of wealth. 200 of the city's most powerful families shimmered under crystal light. Leo, in his miniature blazer, was supposed to walk on stage, bow with his class, and exit, a 30-second proof of concept. He did walk on stage, he did not bow. He scanned the blinding crowd, his small face pinched with a fear Patricia knew instantly. He was looking for his anchor in the storm of strange faces. His eyes found hers at the back wall. And then he did what any terrified 5-year-old would do. He pointed at the only source of safety he'd ever truly known. His voice, amplified by the lapel microphone he shouldn't have been wearing, rang out clear as a bell. "My mommy is right there, that's my mommy." The silence was absolute. Then the sound of Lillian Chen's champagne flute hitting marble, a sharp, expensive explosion. You could see the calculation flash across Alexander Chen's face in real time. The social catastrophe, the humiliation, the threat to his carefully constructed narrative. His stare moved from his son to his ashen wife and finally locked onto Patricia. It wasn't anger, it was eradication. The car ride back to the estate was conducted in a silence colder than space. Patricia held Leo, who was now sobbing, confused, in the third-row seat. Neither of his parents looked back. What happened next wasn't a dismissal. It was an extraction. 2 security personnel met the car at the gate, not the usual staff. These were men from Alexander's corporate security team. They escorted Patricia to her suite while a third man packed her belongings. Not a single word was spoken to her. Alexander was waiting in his study. The legal document was already on the desk. A severance agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, a non-disparagement clause. The sum of money listed was obscene. It was also, she understood immediately, the price of her silence and her disappearance. "You will take this," he said, his voice flat. "You will sign tonight. You will be on a flight to anywhere else tomorrow morning. You will never attempt to contact my family again." Patricia's voice trembled, and Leo. Alexander Chen didn't blink. "You misunderstood your role. You were an employee. He is a Chen. You will forget him and he will forget you. That is what the money is for." But as Patricia was led out, a final, wrenching sound tore through the house. Leo, fighting the hold of a fourth security man on the staircase landing, screaming her name, "Tica, don't go, mommy." That's when Alexander delivered the final blow, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for her. "If you ever come near my son again, I will not use lawyers. I will use every other tool at my disposal. And you and your sick mother will disappear into a problem no one will ever bother to solve." The heavy oak door closed behind her. She stood on the steps of the mansion, her suitcase beside her, the signed check in her hand, and the echo of a little boy's screams in her ears. She had just been paid a fortune to abandon the child who called her mommy, and she had 48 hours to decide if money was enough to make her obey. Patricia didn't cash the check, she framed it. She hung it on the wall of her mother's tiny apartment as a reminder of what her silence was worth. Then she called the only person she knew who hated Alexander Chen more than she did, his younger brother Daniel. Daniel Chen was the family's black sheep, a human rights lawyer who'd been disinherited for defending tenants against his father's real estate empire. He met Patricia in a downtown diner, his eyes scanning the room out of habit. "My brother thinks he's a god because he moves decimal points," Daniel said, stirring his coffee. "But family court is a different universe. It runs on evidence of care, not cash. Tell me everything, especially what he said about making you disappear." For 3 hours, Patricia talked. She showed him the thousands of photos on her phone, not just of Leo, but detailed logs, meals, medications, developmental milestones, every scraped knee and nightmare. She played a voice memo she'd recorded after the gala, her hands shaking, recounting Alexander's threat verbatim. Daniel listened, his expression turning from professional interest to cold fury. "He made a critical error," Daniel finally said. "He threatened you, that's coercion, which voids the NDA under California law. And by firing you for a child's natural attachment, he's potentially violated labor laws regarding retaliation. But none of that gets you Leo. For that, we need to prove you stand in loco parentis, in the place of a parent." He explained the legal mountain. To even file for visitation, they had to demonstrate she had a parent-like relationship with Leo for a significant period, with the parent's knowledge. They had to prove severing that bond would cause Leo serious psychological harm, and they had to do it against a legal team that billed more per hour than Patricia made in a month. "We need a child psychologist's evaluation of Leo," Daniel said, "and we need to get it without his parents' consent. That means we need someone on the inside." The inside came to them. 2 days later, an encrypted message arrived from a number Patricia didn't recognize. It was Marta, the family's longtime cook. The message was simple. "The boy cries all night, he calls your name. They are talking about sending him to a behavioral retreat in Switzerland, a place for troubled rich kids. He leaves in 2 weeks. Patricia's blood went cold. She knew about those places, isolated, strict, where phone calls were monitored and attachments were corrected. Leo wouldn't survive it. Daniel moved with terrifying speed. He filed an emergency ex parte motion for temporary visitation and to prevent Leo's removal from the state, attaching Patricia's logs, the voice memo, and a declaration from Marta about Leo's distress. The hearing was set for 48 hours later. The Chen legal machine exploded into motion. Their response was a 200-page blizzard of motions to dismiss, to seal, to compel arbitration. They submitted declarations from child psychologists they'd hired stating Leo's attachment was unhealthy and transference-based, and that Patricia was a disgruntled employee suffering from attachment delusions. They submitted Patricia's entire employment file, highlighting every minor infraction, a late arrival due to traffic, a broken vase. But they also made their first public mistake. Alexander gave an interview to a business magazine. When asked about the nanny lawsuit, he smirked. "It's the cost of doing business. When you're at the top, people try to take things, even your family. We're dealing with it." The quote ran with the headline, "Billionaire calls custody battle cost of doing business." The internet did the rest. Overnight, the story morphed from a tabloid curiosity into a class war parable. Memes juxtaposed Alexander's smirk with Patricia's framed check. The hashtag #MyMommyIs trended, with thousands of people sharing stories of nannies, grandparents, and step-parents who'd been their real anchors. Donations flooded a legal fund Daniel set up. The night before the hearing, Patricia's phone rang. It was Lillian Chen. Her voice was stripped of its usual lacquered calm, vibrating with a raw, shocking pain. "He won't eat, he just rocks in his closet holding the stuffed elephant you gave him. The doctor says it's a regression, he's disappearing." There was a long silence. I didn't let myself know what you were to him." Patricia's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you want, Lillian?" I want my son back. The words were a choked whisper. Alexander's solution is to send him away to be fixed. I can't fight him alone. Your hearing is tomorrow. If you get visitation, could I come? Could I see how you talk to him? It was a seismic shift. The biological mother, the gallery queen, was asking the nanny for parenting lessons, and in that request, Patricia heard the faint crack in the Chen fortress wall. The hearing was a war of inches. The Chen legal team, led by a silver-haired attorney who spoke like a funeral director, argued this was a simple contract dispute, that Patricia was extorting the family, that allowing her access would only further confuse a vulnerable child. Daniel stood up. He didn't argue law first. He played a video on the courtroom monitor. It was security footage from the Chen estate's kitchen, timestamped the day after Patricia was fired, provided by Marta. It showed Leo, tiny and pale, sitting at the enormous island. A housekeeper placed a plate of food in front of him. He didn't move. He just stared at the empty chair next to him, Patricia's chair. After 5 full minutes, he laid his head on the counter and sobbed, his small body shuddering. The courtroom went still. The judge, a weary-looking woman in her 60s, removed her glasses. "Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice quiet in the silence, "this is not about contracts. This is about a child who is grieving the sudden, unexplained loss of his primary caregiver. Alexander Chen can buy many things. He cannot buy back the light in his son's eyes. Only one person can do that." The judge granted the emergency order. Patricia was awarded 2 hours of supervised visitation, twice a week, at a neutral child center, and she barred the parents from taking Leo out of California pending a full psychological evaluation. It was a tactical nuclear strike. Alexander had lost control of the narrative and his son's schedule. The press camped outside the Westwood Child Center for the first visit. Patricia walked through a gauntlet of cameras, her heart hammering. Inside the bright, toy-scattered room, a supervisor watched from a corner. Then the door opened. Leo stood there holding a social worker's hand. He looked smaller, deflated. He stared at Patricia for a long, terrifying moment. Then he ran. He crashed into her legs, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her stomach. He didn't cry. He just held on as if she were a life raft in a churning sea. Patricia sank to her knees, holding him, whispering into his hair, "I'm here, I'm right here." From the observation room behind a one-way mirror, Lillian Chen watched, her hand pressed to the glass. After that day, the battle lines reformed in a shocking new configuration. It was no longer Patricia versus the Chen family. It was Patricia and Lillian versus Alexander. The billionaire's wife had quietly retained her own attorney. She filed for legal separation and requested primary physical custody, citing Alexander, destructive prioritization of reputation over child welfare. Alexander's retaliation was swift and brutal. He froze Lillian's accounts. He leaked salacious rumors about her to the press. He had her followed. The divorce of the century was now the bloody backdrop to the fight for Leo. And then Daniel discovered the pivot that changed everything. Buried in a corporate filing for one of Alexander's shell companies was a recurring payment to a private psychiatric facility in Utah. The date started 3 years ago, around the time Lillian's public appearances became less frequent, her smiles more brittle. Daniel dug deeper. He found a sealed medical record improperly filed. Lillian Chen had been diagnosed with severe postpartum psychosis after Leo's birth. She had been hospitalized, involuntarily committed for 6 weeks. Alexander had paid for the silence of the doctors, the facility, and had it legally expunged. In his custody filings, he was now prepared to brand her an unfit, unstable mother. He had never intended to let Lillian keep Leo. The Swiss boarding school was just the first step. His plan was to isolate the boy completely, to mold him without the interference of any mother figure, biological or hired. Patricia now understood the true stakes. This wasn't just about her bond with Leo. It was about saving him from a father who saw motherhood itself as a weakness to be engineered out of his heir. Alexander Chen wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to erase the very concept of mommy from his son's life. Armed with this, Daniel went for the throat. He amended their petition not just for visitation, but for shared legal custody between Patricia and Lillian, arguing they were the only stable, nurturing parental figures Leo had ever known. The headline the next day was apocalyptic for Alexander. Nanny and estranged wife unite to seize control of Chen heir. The final hearing for the temporary custody order was set for 1 week. Alexander, cornered and publicly humiliated, did what all predators do when their power is threatened. He escalated beyond the law. The night before the hearing, as Patricia left a meeting with Daniel, a black sedan pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. It wasn't a lawyer. It was one of Alexander's security men, the same one who had packed her suitcase. "Mr. Chen has a new offer," the man said, his voice flat. "You get on a plane tonight, you get 5 million cash in an offshore account, you never speak of this again." He paused, his eyes cold. "Or we release the footage of you taking Leo from the Chen estate the night of the gala." the footage that shows you carrying a crying child into a car against his parents' wishes, the footage that looks to any jury exactly like kidnapping. Patricia stared at the security man and did the one thing he didn't expect. She laughed, a raw, shattered sound. "Tell him I'm done taking his offers," she said, "and tell him I know about the facility in Utah." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. He'd just become the messenger of a declaration of war. She called Daniel from a crowded coffee shop, her back to the wall. "He's fabricating a kidnapping charge. We need to move first." Daniel's voice was grim. "He's panicking. The Utah revelation changes everything. It gives Lillian leverage and exposes his pattern of using money to hide problems. But a fake kidnapping charge, that's a nuclear option. We need to get ahead of it. We go public, all of it." The next morning, Daniel held a press conference on the steps of the courthouse. He didn't just outline the custody case. He laid out the entire architecture of Alexander Chen's coercion, the threatened kidnapping frame-up, the hidden postpartum diagnosis, the payments to the Swiss school, the severance check designed to buy a child's love. He presented the framed check as a visual prop. "This," he said, holding it up, "is the price Alexander Chen puts on a mother's bond. We reject it." The story detonated. It was no longer a custody battle, it was a true crime thriller. News vans surrounded the Chen estate. The board of Alexander's flagship company called an emergency meeting. His public image, once untouchable, was now toxic. Inside the fortress, Alexander made his move. He filed a cross-complaint against Patricia for intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation, seeking $50 million in damages. He also filed for sole custody of Leo, submitting the fabricated kidnapping footage to the court under seal. The judge, overwhelmed by the media circus and the severity of the new allegations, did the unthinkable. She postponed the custody hearing and ordered Leo into temporary protective custody with a court-appointed guardian ad litem. Patricia's victory vanished in a single ruling. Leo was taken from the Chen estate by a social worker and placed in a licensed foster home, a neutral location until the court could untangle the mess. He was now a ward of the state, and neither parent nor Patricia could see him. Lillian Chen shattered. She showed up at Patricia's mother's apartment, devoid of her usual armor, shaking. "He's taken my son twice now," she whispered. "First by hiring you to do my job, and now by making him a prisoner of the court. I will burn his world to the ground to get Leo back. Whatever you need from me, you have it." The alliance solidified. Lillian provided access to everything: old family servers, confidential emails, the private journals she'd kept during her hospitalization. And in those journals, Daniel found the thread that would unravel everything. Lillian had written about her suspicion during her fragmented postpartum state that Alexander had an affair. She'd found a receipt for a diamond necklace she never received. A name, Elise. Daniel, using his network of private investigators, found Elise. She was a former executive at one of Alexander's companies who'd left abruptly with a massive settlement 7 years ago. She now lived in New Zealand. When Daniel reached her, she was hesitant. Then he mentioned the necklace. She was silent for a long time. "He told me his wife was unstable, that their marriage was over. I believed him until I got pregnant. Then he offered me 2 choices: terminate the pregnancy with a generous payment or keep it and get nothing. I took the money. I left the country. I had a little boy. I named him Samuel." Daniel's breath caught. "How old is Samuel?" "He just turned 6. Leo was 5. The timeline was a hand grenade. Alexander Chen had a potential second son, born just a year before Leo, from an affair he'd concealed and paid to disappear. This wasn't just about custody of Leo anymore. This was about Alexander's entire legacy and the lies underpinning it. But they had no proof of paternity, until Lillian remembered something. In the early days of their marriage, Alexander, paranoid about his health, had undergone extensive genetic screening. The results were stored in a private, encrypted cloud server, a server Lillian still had the backup keys to. They accessed the files. They found Alexander's full genetic profile. Now they needed a sample from the boy in New Zealand. Patricia made the call. She spoke to Elise not as a lawyer but as a woman who loved a child Alexander Chen had tried to erase. "He wants to replace mothers with silence and money," Patricia said. "He wants to raise heirs, not sons. Your boy deserves to know his history even if it's ugly, and we need to know if Leo has a brother." Elise agreed. She mailed a cheek swab from her son Samuel. While they waited, the campaign against Alexander escalated. The board, fearing total brand collapse, forced him to take a leave of absence. News broke that the Securities and Exchange Commission was opening an inquiry into his company's financial disclosures, prompted by anonymous tips about offshore accounts used for hush money. Alexander, cornered and bleeding power, played his last card. He used his media connections to plant a story that Patricia was not just a disgruntled nanny, but a con artist with a history of targeting wealthy families. He produced a forged background check alleging she'd been fired from a previous job for boundary issues. The story gained traction in certain outlets, muddying the waters. The DNA results arrived on the morning of the rescheduled custody hearing. Daniel opened the email in the courthouse hallway. He read the report, then looked at Patricia and Lillian, his face pale. It's a match. Samuel is Alexander's biological son. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The implications were staggering. Alexander had hidden an heir. In a custody battle where he was arguing his sole fitness to parent, he had abandoned another child. It was a character annihilator. But Daniel saw deeper. This changes Leo's position entirely. If Alexander has another son, Leo is no longer the sole heir. He's expendable. That makes him more vulnerable, not less. They entered the courtroom. Alexander was already there, flanked by his new, even more expensive legal team. He looked thinner, a wildness in his eyes. The judge, aware of the media storm, called for order. The hearing was a brutal technical slog. Alexander's lawyers hammered the kidnapping frame, the defamation, the pattern of instability. They presented the forged background check. For a moment, the momentum seemed to shift. Then Daniel stood. "Your Honor, we have new evidence that goes to the core of petitioner's character and fitness as a parent. Evidence of a pattern of concealment and abandonment." Objection, relevance, Alexander's lead attorney barked. "It goes to truthfulness and moral character, Your Honor," Daniel countered. The judge, her eyes tired, allowed it. Briefly, Counselor. Daniel approached the bench with the DNA report. "We have confirmed that Alexander Chen has a 6-year-old biological son, Samuel, living in New Zealand, born from an extramarital affair. He paid the mother to disappear and has never acknowledged the child. This is the man who asks for sole custody of Leo Chen." The courtroom erupted. Alexander shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "This is a fabrication, a desperate smear." But the judge was reading the report. She looked at Alexander, her expression one of profound disgust. "Mr. Chen, is this your genetic profile?" Alexander's lawyer tried to intervene, but Alexander was beyond counsel. The pressure, the exposure, the unraveling of his life broke something in him. "That woman was paid. She signed an NDA. This is illegal. You have no right." His outburst was his confession. The judge didn't need to hear more. She revoked Alexander's temporary visitation rights and ordered an immediate, full psychological evaluation of him before any further custody discussions. She also granted Patricia and Lillian joint temporary visitation with Leo, under supervision, while he remained in foster care. It was a victory, but a hollow one. Leo was still in the system, and Alexander, publicly destroyed, had nothing left to lose. As they left the courthouse, a different black sedan pulled up. Not security, 2 men in cheap suits flashed badges, federal badges. "Alexander Chen," one said, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The handcuffs clicked shut on the billionaire's wrists in full view of the cameras. Alexander Chen was led away, his empire collapsing around him. Patricia watched, feeling no triumph, only a cold dread. The dragon was wounded but not dead, and Leo was still caught in its claws. That night, the call came from the foster agency. Leo had been asking for her for Mommy Trisha, and had become so distressed they'd sedated him. The court-appointed guardian, a kind but overwhelmed woman, asked if Patricia could come for an emergency visit to calm him. Daniel warned it was a risk. The system was chaotic, but Patricia couldn't say no. She arrived at the suburban foster home, her heart in her throat. Leo was sitting on the floor, listless, holding his stuffed elephant. When he saw her, he didn't run. He just held out his arms, a silent plea. She sat with him for an hour, singing the quiet song she'd always sung until he fell into an exhausted sleep. As she left, the guardian walked her to the door. "He's a sweet boy," the woman said softly. "It's a shame. The system is so backed up. These cases can take years." The word years hung in the air. Patricia looked back at the house where Leo slept, a temporary stop in a labyrinth of bureaucracy. Alexander was in jail, but his money, his legacy of control, was a ghost that still held sway. The legal battle could stretch on forever, and Leo would grow up in waiting rooms and court-appointed evaluations. She got into her car and called Daniel. "We won the battle today," she said, her voice steady with a new, terrifying resolve. "But Leo is losing the war. We're not waiting for the system anymore. We're taking him home." The plan was not to kidnap, it was to adopt. Daniel found the precedent. In cases of extraordinary circumstance, a third party with a proven parent-like bond could petition for emergency guardianship, bypassing the frozen custody battle. The petition required the consent of one legal parent and the child's own testimony. Lillian did not hesitate. She signed the consent form the same night. The next morning, Daniel filed an emergency petition for Patricia to be appointed Leo's temporary legal guardian. The hearing was set for 3 days later. The request was so audacious, so outside normal procedure, that the judge had no choice but to hear it. The night before the hearing, Patricia did something she hadn't done since she was a girl. She prayed, not in a church but in her mother's living room, holding the framed check. She prayed for the words to make a judge understand that a family wasn't a bloodline but a harbor. The courtroom was different this time. Smaller, quieter. The media had been excluded. It was just the judge, a stenographer, and the principals. Alexander, out on bail but shackled by an ankle monitor, was present via video from his attorney's office. His image on the screen was a grey, furious ghost. The judge, the same weary woman from before, cut to the heart. "Ms. Davis, the court does not grant guardianship to nannies. Explain why I should break that precedent." Patricia stood. She didn't look at her notes. She spoke directly to the judge. "Your Honor, I am not asking you to give me a child. I am asking you to return a child to the only home he has ever known. For 3 years, my arms were his home. My voice was his comfort. I was hired to be a shadow, but I became his foundation. When you take a child from his foundation, the whole world collapses. You've seen the videos. You've seen him collapse." She turned and pointed to the monitor showing Alexander. "That man offered me money to disappear from my own child's life. He threatened to make my mother disappear if I didn't. He hid another son across the world. He tried to hide his wife's illness. He defines family as property and silence. I'm asking you to define it as love and safety. Please, give Leo back his harbor." The judge was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I will hear from the child." Leo was brought in, holding the hand of his court-appointed advocate. He looked small in the big chair, his feet not touching the floor. The judge spoke to him gently. "Leo, do you know why you're here today?" He nodded, his eyes wide. "To see Mommy." "Which mommy are you here to see, Leo?" He didn't look at Lillian or the screen. He looked at Patricia. He pointed. "That one, Mommy Tricia." "Why is she your mommy?" Leo's lower lip trembled, but his voice was clear. "She sings the song when the dark is scary. She knows my toast. She kisses the hurts. She came back when I was lost." Alexander's voice crackled from the monitor, cold and controlled. "He's been coached. This is manipulation." The judge didn't look at the screen. She kept her eyes on Leo. "What about your other mommy, Leo, the one who gave birth to you?" Leo glanced at Lillian, who was crying silently. He smiled a little. "That's Mama Lily. She paints with me now. She learns the song too." The judge leaned back. She had heard everything she needed. She granted the petition. Patricia was appointed Leo's temporary legal guardian for a period of 6 months, with Lillian having unrestricted visitation and shared decision-making. Leo would live with Patricia in her mother's apartment, with weekly check-ins from social services. The foster care order was vacated. Alexander's scream of rage through the monitor was cut off as his lawyer muted the feed. Leo ran to Patricia, and for the first time she could hold him without a supervisor watching, without a clock ticking down. It was over. He was hers. They were for now a family. The aftermath was a series of quiet settlements. Facing devastating criminal charges and the ruin of his reputation, Alexander Chen accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and financial obstruction. In exchange, he signed away his parental rights to Leo permanently. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Lillian finalized her divorce, receiving a settlement that was a fraction of Alexander's wealth but enough to live independently for the rest of her life. She moved into a cottage a few blocks from Patricia's apartment. She started therapy, real therapy, not the silent, paid-off kind. She learned to make toast the way Leo liked it. And Patricia, she became Leo's legal mother. The adoption was finalized on a sunny Tuesday, with Lillian standing as a witness. The framed severance check now hung in a new home, a small house with a backyard, bought with the proceeds from a book deal Patricia never intended to sign but did to secure their future. The final surprise came in the mail a year later, a letter from New Zealand from Elise. Enclosed was a photograph of a smiling boy with dark hair and familiar eyes, Samuel. The letter read, "Thank you for setting the truth free. We are happy. Samuel knows about his brother now. Perhaps one day they might meet." Patricia showed the photo to Leo. "That's a boy named Samuel. He's your brother in a way." Leo studied the picture. "Does he have a mommy who sings the song?" "Yes," Patricia said, "he does." "Good," Leo said and ran off to play. The world for him was once again whole. The story that began with a single word in a silent auditorium ended not with a battle, but with a choice. The choice to define family not by DNA or decree, but by the daily, humble act of showing up. Patricia and Lillian, once separated by class and contract, built a new kind of family around a little boy who had loved so fiercely he forced the truth into the light. They had taken him home, and in doing so they had finally come home themselves. So what is the price of a mother's love? For Alexander Chen, it was a line item on a balance sheet. For Patricia, it was every sleepless night, every whispered song, every risk that led her to a courtroom to fight for a child who was never legally hers. This story began with a single devastating word, mommy, a word that should be simple but in the world of power, privilege, and perfect facades became a weapon. It exposed a brutal truth that the most essential work in our society, the nurturing of children, is often done by those we pay to be invisible and then punish for becoming indispensable. Patricia and Leo's story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Who gets to be called a parent? Is it biology, or is it the one who shows up day after day building a world of safety for a child? The law is slow to catch up to the reality of modern families, but in that gap, lives are shattered and remade. The Chen case became a landmark not just for its sensational details but for what it represented, a crack in the armor of absolute power. It proved that love, when documented and fought for with relentless courage, can upend even a billionaire's empire, that a nanny and an estranged wife could forge an alliance stronger than any prenuptial agreement, that a child's truth spoken in innocence could topple a giant. But the story's real ending isn't in a legal decree. It's in the quiet, ordinary moments that followed. It's in the backyard barbecues, the homework struggles, the shared holidays between two households bound not by marriage, but by mutual devotion to a little boy. It's in the promise of a future where Leo, and perhaps one day his brother Samuel, understand that family is a choice you make, not a title you're born into. The systems that tried to break them, the opaque contracts, the intimidating lawsuits, the threat of disappearance, all failed. They failed because the human heart, especially a child's heart, maps its own geography of home. And sometimes it takes a seismic event, a single word shouted into a silent room, for the rest of us to see the map. So the next time you hear a simple word, a name, a title that seems out of place, listen closer. You might be hearing the first crack in a world that needs breaking. You might be hearing the sound of a love that refuses to be priced, silenced, or erased. If you believe that family is defined by love, not just by law, hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories that challenge the way things are and fight for the way they should be. Thanks for watching.